All right, everyone. Donald Trump scoring a fairly major endorsement, which is that of the NRA, the National Rifle Association. I've been critical of the NRA mainly in the past. Gun Owners of America and certain other groups have sort of taken the fore on chipping away at existing anti-gunnery, whereas the NRA, generally speaking, they'll stand in the way of new anti-gunnery, but they're not really doing anything about pre-existing anti-gun ordinances and laws, especially at the state level. It's good. They stand for the ability of the militia to keep and bear arms, but they don't go as far as some other contemporary, maybe more socially relevant groups at this time. But they made the obvious choice. They endorsed Donald Trump. And so now I decided it's an opportunity to weigh in on my beliefs about guns. By the way, my book, Gun Rights, The Gun Rights Debate and How to Win It, available on Amazon. Go to the My Work section, link in the description to either of my books' blogs, Blogspot or WordPress. Sold thousands of copies, actually. I make various arguments about the good and bad arguments you can make with regards to supporting the Second Amendment. We're going to see a moment, I joke about this. It is a joke, but it's funny anyway. Like 40 years in the future, the leader of the NRA will be AOC, and she'll have a BB gun, and she'll hold it aloft Charlton Heston style and say, "From my cold dead hands," or something like that. "You aren't taking my 177 away from me. You aren't taking my pump-action pneumatic weapon away. We don't need common sense BB gun control," or something like that. It's just funny. Basically, I criticize the NRA because they're kind of FUD sometimes. It's like basically, well, Grandpappy's shotgun or this bolt action, revolvers. I like revolvers. I'm a big revolver fan. I'd like to have a little collection of revolvers. I really want to get one of those Top Break 22 Magnums, actually, because that sounds like it would be fucking fun. Even though they don't have a trigger guard for some reason. It's like, yeah, okay, it's already concealable enough. That one modification might make it a little bit safer. Anyway, I like revolvers. But I also like the AR-15, the AK-47, 50 cals, and things like that. And so I go more in the Gun Owners of America direction than the NRA semi-FUD direction. Sort of like the NRA is Ted Cruz and Gun Owners of America is Rand Paul. That's a good metaphor for it. That's a good representation. He deserves the NRA endorsement because quite clearly Joe Biden is deeply set against the rights of the militia, which is the people at large. To be well-regulated means quite literally well-armed, to have sufficient ammunition and training and so forth. It's easy to obtain if you're in rural America. Unfortunately, gun policies all over the country are metastasizing at the moment. It's very strange to me, by the way, and I really hope that Donald Trump does make this one of the planks in his platform. Not just some empty words at the NRA get-together when you're getting their endorsement and say, well, I support gun rights. It needs to be more beefy than that. We have a binding Supreme Court decision under Bruin, for example. And it puts a litmus test to every anti-gun ordinance at state and federal level and subjugates it to the concept that it was originalistic, that is, that it would have been tolerated by the people that founded the country. Well, there are none. The first anti-gunnery that existed outside of territorial law in the United States, which wasn't entirely subjugate to the Constitution at all, many of the little mining towns and stuff out in the far west back in those days, they were effectively direct democracies, sometimes with a dictatorial sheriff or something like that, and they made their own rules. Basically, if you want to come into camp, you have to play by the rules that the people here have agreed upon. It was somewhat outside of the normal legalistic system that existed in the east of the Mississippi, for example. Even some of those states, a little bit territorial at the time. If you don't have a state government, if you're just a territory, well, then you're going to have to deal with that local sheriff, and you're hoping it's Wild Bill Hickok and not somebody corrupt. By the way, gun crime actually fairly scant in those days, out in the Wild West. We always think of desperados running around robbing trains. Those things didn't happen so often. It was much more easy to be a criminal in a state that was properly incepted, because you could more easily get away with it, free of vigilante influence, as the local population brands you an outlaw and decides to hang you from a cactus. Trump getting the endorsement is good. I would have endorsed him too. I mean, I'm going to be voting for him come November. But he's not a purist. I'm hoping that he presses the issue. Under the Bruin decision, all existing gun control in the United States is null and void. And yet we've got states that have gone rogue, decided to openly violate the Constitution under the understanding and premise of that SCOTUS decision. Trump can score a win by pressing that issue home. he can score a big win, make the Republican Party take up a more puristic position in which they can cite existing and contemporary case law and say, look, this state's law that regulates magazine size and forces you to use low-capacity magazines, quite clearly, the founders never would have countenanced such a thing. Point to the Cruikshank decision. The Ku Klux goddamn Klan in 1876 is the source of anti-gunnery in the United States. We had none for almost the first 100 years of this nation's existence. Nobody who fought in the Revolution was alive by the time that any non-territorial ordinance whatsoever was passed against the rights of the militia. None, not one of them. The last one that died was Madison. He was only in his 30s, I think, actually, at the founding of the country, or maybe his 20s. He's a young dude. He was president for a while. And he died in, what was it, 1836 or something like that. For some reason, I thought that it was John Adams or one of these others. It was actually Madison. He was the last founder to die. That was in the 1830s. Well, that's a long time before the 1870s. The Cruikshank decision was when the Ku Klux Klan said, well, if these former slaves get guns, in areas where they predominate, they might rape the white women or something, or they might resist our tyranny in our attempts to prevent them from voting or doing anything civic. Oh, I know. The Second Amendment's not absolute. The founders intended it as a privilege. The whole concept of firearm ownership or weapons ownership in general being a conditional privilege dates to the Ku Klux Klan Jim Crow era. Just simply tell liberals about this. Their heads will spin around. They'll roll their eyes. They know it to be true if they look into it at all, but they'll get cognitive dissonance. I wrote a book, a short work, The Gun Rights Debate and How to Win It. Links in the description of my blog spot and my WordPress with my books blogs. You should peruse that. Go to the My Work section and get a copy of that. I lay out the arguments that are good and bad to make against anti-gunners. For example, the Girardoni rifle and things like that. They're very, very effective, but not in the way that most people use those arguments. They talk about the puckle gun or revolvers or things like that. It shows that the founders were acutely aware that weapons would advance and become more fast-loading, more lethal, better accuracy. They knew about these things. They had the Kalthoff and all of these others, the early repeater rifle. But they did not, those arguments do not translate directly to defending the AR-15, except in a roundabout manner. I make a nuanced argument. Recreational McNukes make an appearance in that book too. I had fun writing it. I thought it was elucidating on the topic. Trump does deserve the NRA endorsement, but I want him to make it more of a cornerstone. The thing I really like about the Trump campaign in 24 is his focus on the First Amendment, and to an extent the Fourth. With his Agenda 47, the very first video he uploaded had to do with instituting an Internet Bill of Rights and reforming Section 230 and things like that. Knocked it out of the park, 10 out of 10, really loved it, and I said at that moment, there's no possibility I'm not voting for this dude. It's like night and day when I compare him to Biden. On guns, though, I want him to take up a similar position. I want him to praise Bruen, a decision partially handed down by the justices that he himself incepted on SCOTUS. That's a big thing. He should talk more about Bruen and less about Roe v. Wade at the moment, for various reasons, politically and otherwise. Make that a main focal point of your campaign, because there are people that are being left out of the rain, so to speak. People like myself, members of the militia, who do enjoy firearms. We're not amosexual. I don't use it to compensate for small pee-pee and all these other fucking stereotypical buzz terms that the leftoids trot out or anything like that. But I do like the fact that I own firearms. They allow me to get meat if the economy collapses. I can go hunting. They allow me to defend my garden. They allow me to defend myself and my family. They allow me to defend my nation. They're necessary, and they should be military weapons. That was actually the point of the Second Amendment. It wasn't to have a weapon for sport shooting. It was to have a weapon to kill enemy soldiers as they attempt to invade your country. It's the entire concept of a civilian militia, by the way, capable of being mustered in organized or disorganized fashion. Confront them with it. Use the Bruen decision. Talk about Cruikshank. I'm going to orgasm if Donald Trump brings up Cruikshank in any debate about gun rights with Joe Biden. That would really show some courtesy to those of us who are members of the militia, because it's about time that the Republican Party actually stand for civil rights, as opposed to largely ignoring them and saying, well, the anti-gunnery of the last 100 years that we always railed against, we'll leave that alone. We just don't want any more anti-gunnery. That ain't going to cut it. That's basically the NRA's bottom line. I go more of the GOA route myself. Get rid of the NFA. Scrap the Ku Klux Klan. You're literally scrapping Klan-sponsored legal documentation if you undo gun control, by the way. That's about all. Peace out.